Items of importance for teachers of students who are English language learners and deaf or hard of hearing. Hello, my name is Kelly McMaine, and I am a teacher of deaf and hard of hearing students in a public elementary school. Currently, I am pursuing a master's in teacher leadership with Teaching English as a Second Language endorsement through Campbellsville University. The photos you see here were taken in China, where my husband and I had the good fortune to meet members of the deaf community in Xi'an. This presentation is intended to provide awareness of the possibility that teachers will encounter students who are both ELL and DHH during their career. Discussion of second language acquisition theory in relation to DHH students, recognition of the challenges that impact language skills development, and share a few strategies to make instruction more accessible to students who are both ELL and DHH. How likely is it that teachers will encounter students who are both ELL and DHH? Gallaudet University tells us that nearly 1 in 4 DHH kindergarten through 12th grade students are also ELL. I certainly have seen that trend in our school district. I'd like to begin by just quickly mentioning some of the terms and how they will be used in this presentation. The term deaf or hard of hearing is an all-encompassing term that will be used to describe learners who have mild hearing loss, fluctuating hearing loss, all the way to profound hearing loss, those who have cochlear implants, those who use sign language, those who use spoken language, those who use hearing aids. It's a vast group with a lot of variables. English language learners. I'd like to just note that this category does not include deaf children who are native ASL users. Although English may not be their L1, if they were born in a country where English is the language of the majority and language of power, they will have been exposed to environmental print as well as lexicalized signs derived from English words and proper nouns or other information that is fingerspelled. Hearing simply refers to anyone who is not DHH. ASL, American Sign Language. This is the language of deaf communities in the United States and Canada, with the exception of Quebec. SLA, in the context of the topic of ELL DHH students, please consider that they might not have an intact first language, depending on several factors that will be mentioned on the next slide. Just a disclaimer, please remember that if you meet one student who is ELL and DHH, you have met one student. I cannot explain how different each student is. Some significant variables that come to bear in this situation include age, extent, cause, diagnosis, and treatment of hearing loss, access to linguistic input, which includes both sign language and spoken languages, social, economic, cultural opportunities, and the potential presence of other health impairments. Differences in learners. When we consider things from the psychological view of second language acquisition, we think about the critical period hypothesis made popular by Lenenberg. And this holds the view that children have only a limited number of years during which normal L1 acquisition is possible, and that physiological changes cause the brain to lose its plasticity, so that if children are deprived of linguistic input during critical period, they won't learn any language normally. I'd like to emphasize normally because We know that these children can and do learn language, but it is difficult and it is not in the normal way that children do who have had unlimited access to either spoken or visual language from birth. Special challenges for ELLs who are DHH. The natural acquisition of L1 is often interrupted due to lack of access to language input. One notable exception is deaf of deaf. These children comprise less than 10% of deaf children and are not limited in their access to L1. Therefore, they have acquired a language in the critical period and have the foundation upon which to add an L2. When there is a lack of diagnosis, treatment, and early intervention, children who are ELL and DHH may present as having cognitive, learning, and behavioral disabilities. ELL students may have a higher incidence of delayed diagnosis and treatment due to limited resources in their countries of origin. Before continuing with the ways that hearing loss impacts language skills development, I would like to introduce you to what is commonly called the speech banana. The speech banana is an area on an audiogram in which all the phonemes of the world's languages fall. This means that when the sounds of speech or phonemes of all known human languages are plotted on an audiogram, they cluster in a banana-shaped region known as the speech banana. I will be referencing this throughout the next set of slides. For example, a child with mild hearing loss, if we look in the upper right quadrant of this diagram, we will see the letters F, TH, and S representing the phonemes that are associated with those letters. A child with a mild hearing loss will have great difficulty in hearing those phonemes and thus will have difficulty pronouncing those phonemes. When we consider the 4 language activities, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, we know that if a child has hearing loss, this will have an impact on those language skills. Considering this from the information processing and central processing perspectives, we recognize that input has been limited due to hearing loss and due to the fact that languages are spoken and children, typically hearing children, are hearing conversations and sounds all around them. We recognize that a child who is deaf or hard of hearing input has been limited. Bottom up and top down are 2 components of central processing that pertain to listening skills. And how this impacts a deaf or hard of hearing child is that their working knowledge of phonological, lexical, and grammatical information may be more limited than typically hearing learners. And so this will require more processing while listening rather than automaticity. In terms of prior knowledge, a lot of children learn information through incidental language. For instance, a child may be playing with toys and not directly within sight of their parents who are having a conversation in the next room. Nevertheless, they overhear that conversation and they gain linguistic knowledge as a result of hearing that incidental language. Such experiences are not accessible to a child who has hearing loss. And so this has an impact on their listening skill development. Speaking. We understand that the speech of deaf and hard of hearing children is not always the same as the speech of a typically hearing child. In terms of the foundations that come to bear on speaking, vocabulary knowledge, pronunciation, grammatical patterns, nonverbal elements, and discourse have an impact on the success of the speaking abilities of a child with hearing loss. For instance, their pronunciation may not be as accurate as their hearing peers. And so when they're practicing speaking, they may become more frustrated. They may also drop morphemes, such as the S, and that can make a difference in their language being clear in terms of tense and quantity. Deaf and hard of hearing children have certain nonverbal behaviors, including eye contact and personal space, that might be different from a hearing child. And within deaf culture, turn taking and leave taking have their own parameters, which would be another discussion entirely. But just be aware that this will have an impact on ELL DHH learners. Context, cultural, and contextual knowledge also have an impact on their ability to speak and express themselves clearly. Reading. Beginning L2 reading influences include the literacy in L1. This is particularly important for native sign language users whose L1 is not a written language. Another influence in reading success is prior oral knowledge, and by definition of being deaf and hard of hearing, oral knowledge may be limited. Written expression. This is an area that can be extremely difficult for children who are deaf and hard of hearing, and at the same time, it can be a very important skill in which they can develop very functional skills that would be important for interpersonal and face-to-face communication. For instance, when ordering at a restaurant, many deaf and hard of hearing individuals may use writing to explain what they're wanting, to ask questions about items on the menu. The key indicator of success for deaf and hard of hearing learners across all aspects of language acquisition is their proficiency in their L1. And that can be their proficiency in sign language. Proficiency in sign language, although it is not a written language, does provide them with grammatical structures that then they can use as a basis for learning a second language. Strategies to increase accessibility. Visuals, visuals, visuals. I know this is best practice for English language learners in general, for teaching them in general, but there are some unique aspects. Do not move around. If a child has hearing loss, that child is looking at your face and at your lips, and moving around makes it very difficult for them to focus. Preferential seating away from blinking lights, away from background noise, not facing a window, and being where they can not only see the teacher but also their peers. Limiting auditory and visual noise. This can include, visual noise can include clothing, can include facial hair, can include jewelry, anything that makes it difficult to focus on what the teacher is saying. It's important to gain a student's attention before speaking and use assistive listening equipment, sign language interpreters, and captioning, and also to make sure when you're going to show a video to preview the closed captions to ensure they're accurate. And above all, ask the student. The student knows what he or she needs. This is a list for you to consult later regarding other people that you can gain insight and information in regards to how to best serve a student who is deaf or hard of hearing. Our professional organization has passed this resolution recognizing deaf learners' right. to become proficient in a native sign language and in written or spoken languages, including English. Thank you very much.